So it's like, okay, God, maybe this is not the full out dream right now. But I believe like when we are good stewards with a little, then we can be entrusted with much.
Welcome to The Home and the Maker, sharing advice and encouragement about all topics homemaking and homesteading, and honoring the maker in all of it. Join Megan from Shine.fm for today's conversation. And hopefully this will glorify our maker. And this is the first episode of the Home and the Maker podcast. So just grateful to be able to do this. And when you think of the word homesteading, you might think of words like canning and a big garden, but also chickens. And so that's why I'm super excited to start off this podcast series, just talking about chickens because it's so fun. And maybe someday I'll
Yes.
jump into it. But I'm excited to have a friend on the podcast with me today, Tabitha. And we actually went to high school together, Kankakee
Wow.
Valley High School
Wow.
in Wheatfield, Indiana, and then we went to college at Olivet Nazarene University. So kept in touch over the years. And then, then I
Awesome.
saw that you, a couple months ago, had started a Facebook page for your chickens. And I was like, what?
Good.
She has a little homestead herself. And I am curious. I mean, first, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm very honored.
All right. And so, first question I want to ask you, I mean, is it just me, or do you feel like there are others especially in our generation, who are kind of gravitating toward the homesteading and the simpler lifestyle and homemaking?
Yes, yeah. It's especially being from our like the area that we grew up in, very rural farm community. So a lot of these things are kind of norm for us. But it is very curious to see what has been a lot of our norm start to become kind of like a fad. I don't think that that's by accident. I think that there's a lot of beautiful things, of course, that we can learn from slowing down and dialing back in our lives, not to mistake that for less work because it's honestly more, but to start to kind of I think I see a lot of that trend of people wanting to take more ownership in their own consumer mentality within our society, whether that comes in the form of making bread or like changing the way that they eat to more whole foods or to like raising their food as well. So I've definitely seen that being a trend. I'm for it. I love it. Of course, we know, like, especially like having the little background with agriculture from our area from FFA and 4-H. I think there's the statistic that farmers only account for probably less than 2% at this point of our general population, yet they feed 100% of our population as well. So I'm definitely loving that trend that more people are taking kind of ownership and accountability for their own consumerism, their own food, their own lives in that way, and being able to kind of taste a little bit of what the Lord has really like offered us, and in the ability to steward what He's given us, and be able to see all of the beautiful processes that come along with that. So
Yeah.
I'm for it.
Yes. So, okay, you are totally for this. We have this background. I mean, you were in FFA too, right?
Yes, yeah, I
Okay.
was.
I was like, I knew you were in some of the ag classes. I just couldn't remember if you were in FFA. Okay.
Yep, got my blue
Um,
jacket and everything.
yes. So, tell me where this all started for you. I believe you grew up with animals, but
Mhm.
was this always kind of a passion you've had, or has this been a more recent thing?
Yeah, I grew up around agriculture. My grandparents up here in Indiana were corn and soybean farmers. And they also raised beef cattle for many, many years. So just kind of around that lifestyle. And then my grandparents out of Missouri were ranchers, so beef cattle, horses, all those fun things too. So I was definitely the kid that was always trying to talk some sort of adult. I didn't care if it was my grandparents, if it was my mom. I was trying to sneak any sort of animal I could, rescue any animal that I could,
Hmm.
convince them to adopt any animal that I could. My poor husband, now all of that transfers onto him. But you know, so it's kind of always been something that I've really just enjoyed. I think that's one of the little God winks or Jesus's fingerprints on my life of just that start of the draw to animals and draw to our way of life, and just really trying to be just obedient to him and how he's continued to develop my life and write my story, and just how that works, all of the things together, right? As we know, like whether that be the good, the bad, the ugly, but also the things that we enjoy, the things that give us life and that we're passionate about too. So we started with our chicken flock actually because we got a couple of chickens that were hand-me-downs from some friends.
Awesome.
I was working at a therapeutic boarding school that was kind of a farm, so it was easy to just keep them there for a little while. And then when my husband and I bought our home in November, we were able to move them out here and officially start our homestead. So it was exciting.
Wow. So you
Yeah.
have been on your little homestead since November. So this is still pretty
Mhm.
new. But I wanted to ask, because on your Facebook page, you said it's about half an acre. And so I was curious, with a smaller size, is that perfect for what you want, or is there some longing for more? And how do you find contentment in that, if that's the case?
Yeah. So definitely when you think homestead, the first thing that comes to mind is probably lots of land, pastures. It's not in a strip of houses with like a half an acre of land.
Yes.
Um, that's for sure. But there's always, of course, that goal and that the desire for a little bit more. I think that, and that's okay. I think that there's definitely space for that. But what my husband and I have really been intentional about redirecting and taking our thoughts captive in is in just choosing contentment. Contentment isn't always something that we naturally feel. It isn't always something naturally that we just are eased into, but sometimes we just have to very intentionally choose that, and not just once but over and over and over again. So yeah, it's even when we first met and started dating, we always have dreamed about having a big farm and doing lots of really awesome ministry opportunities through that.
Hmm.
um we don't got big farm funds right now, let's be honest. It is
Yeah.
2024 and the housing market is not fun at this point.
No.
But we were so blessed to be able to purchase our own home and our first home in November. And it came with a little bit of land. So it's like, okay, God, maybe this is not the full out dream right now. But I believe like when we are good stewards with a little, then we can be entrusted with much.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean that we be good stewards with a little just so that we can get much, but so that we can be content in this season and in this process. So that's kind of where we're at. That's kind of what we're rolling with is, yeah, maybe this isn't a 30-acre homestead and 30-acre farm, but
Yeah.
it is dirt. We are privileged enough to own some dirt. And so, what are some skills and some things that we can do while we are here to not only just allow us to start to build those skills, but also help contribute towards building our ability to actually facilitate and run our full out dream.
Yeah.
So I think that that's kind of just where we're at, is choosing contentment. And some days are better than others, but you know what? Like, we have plenty for this season. Probably sometimes even more than what, like the yard work or all the little upkeep things, it definitely keeps us busy. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely a blessing just to learn those skills like gradually, I think, as well. And just sitting in that contentment for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's so good.
Yeah.
That intentional choosing of it. But now let's get into chickens because I want to
Yes.
learn so much about chickens. So
Love
tell
it.
me just basic how many chickens you have, what kinds you have, but also how many ducks you have. Like just give us the landscape of what you've got.
Yes. So I've heard definitely through the homesteading community and stuff that chickens are kind of the gateway. You get a couple and then chicken math starts to kick in because one chicken is obviously far too little. It obviously needs a couple.
Oh
So
yeah.
we went from having goodness, I believe probably 12 chickens to now we have about 31.
Wow.
And that's not counting our little ducks that we've added in there too. So, yeah, we adopted a flock of chickens from some of our friends who were moving. So we've got some of our basic breeds in there. Like we've got some Easter eggers, we've got some Morans, we've got some Americanas. So there are probably our higher egg producers. And then we adopted 7 more from a local farm that
Wow.
was wanting to kind of transition out. And so we've got a couple more goofy looking ones. We've got some laced polish, which have like the big poofy feathers on the top of their
Yes.
heads. And we've got some, oh goodness, we've got some ones that look like they've got a mohawk. They've got a really funky looking name. I don't really remember. But they're fun as well. So our egg colors are really cool.
Yes.
Typically when you see eggs in a store, they're either that like stark white or they're like a brown color. And that really is those like more commercial breeders that will have like those varieties just because that's just the kind of breeds that probably produce the most. But we have a little bit of variety here. So we've got some pink, we've got some dark brown, some tan, some green, some blue, you name it. So
Wow. That's so
um,
cool.
it's pretty fun putting the egg cartons together when I send them off to different families. And it's pretty fun to just see the variety in there. So I always try to space them out so they look nice and colorful and well balanced.
That's so cool. That would be like just a highlight of the day.
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure. It's fun. We got and we because we have so many right now, we've got about 16 hens that are producing at pretty max capacity. They're the best producers, like more in the spring-ish,
Okay.
but they're pretty good throughout the summer as well. Just sometimes it can get impacted because of the heat and the weather. A lot of times they tend to slow down in the winter. So typically around this time of year, many people have a lot and have an abundance. So that's definitely where we're at. I've got a big old basket that's full to the brim. And then I've got
Wow.
a little basket that I carry out there every morning to collect more. And it's fun. It's fun. So definitely way more than what we need, but in part of that is getting to feed other people too,
Mhm.
which is a big blessing. So
That's awesome. So you also have meat chickens though. So is
mhm,
there a difference in raising them? Like,
mhm.
is there a big distinguishment between the two?
Yeah, yeah. So, really the main difference in any animal that we would consider like meat versus like even like for cows or something like dairy or something like that. For the chickens, there's a couple of different breeds that just tend to grow at a little faster rate. They're specifically bred to have a higher yield of meat when
Mhm.
they're processed, whereas our egg layers, they're just going to be a little more bony in structure. So they spend a lot of their energy and output on producing a lot of eggs.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where that difference is. For us this year, we raised Cornish Cross, which is a pretty popular breed of meat birds. So we all in all, we had a smaller run this year of 10, and we got about 40 pounds of meat from that.
Wow.
So that was huge. You could definitely still process a chicken that is primarily for eggs, but you'll not get as high of a yield of meat quantity. with that, and the quality might be a little bit different too. So it might not be as tender, or it might have different flavor to it as well. So they just with any of the ag engineering when it comes to breeding of animals, there's people that are way smarter than me that know how God has created our bodies to work, and they really capitalize on a lot of the different qualities that some of the breeds have in order to breed what we know is like our meat birds and or our laying breeds or laying varieties as well. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what the difference is, and that kind of applies to a couple different animal breeds across the board as well. There's not a huge stark difference. It just really depends on the intentionality behind why the animal was bred and what their intention would be for the purpose for us as humans. So
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah.
So, for someone like me and my husband
Mhm.
who could get into this someday, like, how do you even get started? Because you just adopted a flock to begin with, but how do you get started with this?
Yeah, I didn't maybe that's just my personality type. I feel like I have a pretty good base knowledge of animals,
Hmm.
and for me, I will be like, okay, well, we have an opportunity. We'll just find out. We'll figure it out.
Figure it
I
out.
think my biggest advice is just of course depending on your personality, right? If you are definitely the more planner, read up on it, do some research on what color variety eggs you'd want, how much eggs you would hope to yield in a year, if you want the higher producers, or if you like the variety and what you're observing in your flock, and just kind of see what your preferences are in that, and just kind of do your research. And then, of course, you could either find a coop on Facebook Marketplace, brand new at Tractor Supply Company, or you can build one or find someone who's handy. But I think you definitely, with anything with animals, of course, like going in with like a base knowledge of what you're getting yourself into is wise, because we're called to be stewards of them. We're not these like dictator owners, right? We
Yes.
are called to be stewards. So, with anything, of course, make sure you know what you're getting into, would be the biggest thing. But for me, it could be as simple as if you happen upon some chickens at the Tractor Supply store, just being able to kind of ask some of those base questions and knowing what you're getting into, and then just diving in and doing it. Honestly, of course, like in regards to wherever your living situation or whatever that looks like, be mindful of that maybe. But I think sometimes you just, like, with having that base knowledge, just sometimes just diving in and experiencing it and being able to learn as you grow. For me, it's been really interesting that even just over the course of the years, even before I was able to have chickens of my own, I knew that this was something that I was interested in. This is something that I was passionate about learning about. And so I tended to gravitate towards families and towards others that I knew who were also in the similar lifestyle. Maybe that wasn't my season at that point, but I was okay with being available to learn.
Mm.
So I would gravitate towards those families, towards those individuals. I would ask questions. I would gain and glean knowledge from them. I would observe them and be extra set of hands to help. I remember even one of our friends who's in the area. They had goats and pigs and chickens, and they had a day where they were processing all of their meat chickens for the year. And I'm like, "Hey, you want some extra set of hands?" I mean, I know it's a lot, so I got in there and
Yeah.
I learned, and so that would be another thing, is just being okay with being a learner and asking questions, and always like starting from a place of knowing what you're kind of getting yourself into, but being okay with understanding that you're going to also learn as you grow,
Hmm.
that you don't have to be an expert in what you've never experienced before. And be okay with asking questions, be okay with the learning process, and continue to try to be the best steward as you can with them in that. So for us, like we adopted a small flock, and then that turned into us figuring it out and learning as we went and finding like tutorials and asking people questions and um sometimes learning the hard way. But I think that it doesn't have to look like a specific thing. Just really being intentional about what your needs will be to be able to have that base knowledge to be a good steward of any animals that come into your care, but being also okay with the process of just learning as you go and asking lots of
Yeah,
questions. I
for
think that would
sure.
just be like my biggest thing. So of course, any of that can look different for each person, but those are like the biggest, like, I think nuggets for sure
Okay.
for anybody who wants to start out.
Awesome. I love it. So you started off small, and then now you have 30 something. So is it expensive? Did you start? I mean, where was I going with this question?
Mhm.
Basically, is it expensive? Do you feel like you are maybe saving money in the long run as far as processing your chickens? You're not buying eggs, you're obviously gathering your eggs. Do you feel
Mhm.
like there is a like savings there versus the expense of all the feed and stuff? Just kind of if you wouldn't mind
Yeah.
going into
No,
that.
not at all. Not at all. Again, I think it kind of goes down to personality. Getting into it, I mean, you can be scrappy. You can find free coops on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or whatever you want, and you can find some free pallets and build something yourself. You can adopt some chickens from people who are wanting to get out of them, and just kind of start that way. I would say overall, when you consider a lot of the different factors, such as like feed or like housing or different things like that, I would just encourage like anybody that you might not see big yields of margin difference in what
Mhm.
you're spending at the store versus how you're investing in your chickens. But I think for a lot of us who are in it, maybe it's just our delusion, but like well, like part of that is that that is a little bit less of the concern for many people, and more of the quality of the food that we're putting in our bodies.
Yeah.
So money wise, probably not making that big of a difference if you do have a large quantity of animals, and you did start scrappy. Some people don't. Some people invest a lot in their coops or a lot in their certain breeds, and they might spend way more on their chicken setup than they would spend on eggs in a year. But it kind of all goes into what are we feeding into our bodies? Is that investment worth that as well? Is the investment in taking ownership over how these animals are raised and treated, and the kind of life that they live to sustain us, like are all of those things kind of factors in it as well. So
Right.
I wouldn't say that I'm saving lots of money because I know I probably am not. But there is definitely for us, like we can send home some with some families, and they help us out with feed costs and things like that. So that's super helpful. And I would maybe like encourage anybody who has like abundance in that, like see what other people you can feed with that abundance too.
Mhm.
But like knowing just to encourage somebody that like no you might be spending more on these eggs than you would technically in a store, but that investment might be much more worth it than just the dollars and cents that you might or might not be saving. So
Right. No, that's so good. So good. So true that because I've even my husband's had to remind me of that too, just with our little garden, like on our
Mhm.
apartment balcony, just like
Yep.
like I'm not saving any money by making our own homemade pesto. He's like, but it's really good. You
Mhm.
know exactly what you're putting into it, and we know how good it is, and that value is so worth it. So
Oh, for
yeah.
sure.
Um,
Absolutely.
how do you manage to care for every one of your flock, multiple flocks, plus all of your animals. And do you have a job as well?
I do.
Okay.
Live a pretty busy, bustling life. Both me and my husband work full time. I'm also a full time student in my grad program, and we're taking care of a homestead on top of trying to maintain mental, emotional,
Yes.
like spiritual well being. So we're pretty busy. But God is good. I've been given a really amazing partner in my husband who
Mhm.
um did not realize he was signing up to be a farmhand, but that's okay. He's gracious. And it's sometimes the mornings can be rushed and busy because I sleep in or I mosey around a little too much and I'm like, oh, I still got chickens to feed, or I still got water buckets to fill up, or
Mhm.
I still have this to tend to. But most of the time those mornings, I try to be more intentional with keeping them slow as much as possible. It might look like waking up a little bit earlier so that I can enjoy more of that process. But man, it is such a joy to
Mhm.
be able to do that. So yeah, even if it's watching the sunrise and going out and filling up water buckets and watching my chickens run after me to get their food, it's quite fun. So 100% possible. And I think we oftentimes we think that, man, I don't have capacity, man, I don't have time. Maybe that's true. Maybe that is true. I mean, I think all of us are probably guilty at some point or another about that. But I also think that we can create space and create
Mhm.
time for what's really important for
Yeah.
us. Let's be honest, like let's all look at our how much we were on our phones in a given day or a given week.
Yeah.
Um I'm I think that we could probably have some margin to spend time in the word, spend time tending to our homes, or our like our chickens,
Yeah.
or our friends or our family or our own mental health as well. So there's definitely margin even in the midst of crazy busy. But I'm thankful that I don't just sustain my own life. I don't sustain my own energy. I don't sustain my own ability to do any of the tasks of the day. But scripture says that in my weakness, I am made strong because of him. So I'm thankful that he's given me opportunities to steward things that are outside of myself, because oftentimes like it's those things that'll get you out of bed in the morning. It's those
Yeah.
things that, okay, like I could get by with just being a potato or just like sitting on the couch, and I'd be completely content. But
Yes.
something outside of myself is physically there that requires attention, time, intentionality, effort. And so those are definitely beautiful motivators to
Yeah.
keep what's important important. So
That's so good. So good. I was going to ask you one last question,
yes.
since we have a few minutes left. Like, what is the number one thing that God has taught you through your homestead?
Yeah. At the beginning of this year, I usually choose a word
Mhm.
instead of having like a ton of New Year's resolutions or different things like that. I try to choose a word that I want to learn more about,
Yeah.
that I want the Lord to shape and mold my heart in. And this year, I was risky enough to ask God to increase my dependence in Him.
Ooh.
And I definitely thought that, man, like I have a homestead. I cannot control how many eggs we get, if they produce, if they don't produce, if they live, if they don't live, all
Yeah.
these things. And so I thought, surely God's just gonna keep opening my eyes with that. And he's so kind, and yes, he uses that, but he also in so many more ways. And there was a time this year that I was without a job for about 2 months,
Mhm.
and my primary role was as their caretaker, as a as a homemaker,
Yeah.
as my homesteader. And at first, when that first came to be, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that security blanket of
Mm.
income, of status, of a role to play, all these things, all that
Yeah.
that blanket was stripped from me."
Mm.
And I just was really, I was given the beautiful gift to allow my life to be simple.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was a really, really beautiful, like, couple months in there where God just really like taught me about the beauty and simplicity of being able to take care of things that are outside of myself, and how he views me in that, is not how being that dependent is not something wildly far off, but that we get to just be children in
Yeah.
front of him. We get to explore and create. And in that season, it just really reminded me and encouraged me and empowered me that God created us, in the garden, and He created us to walk with Him, and in the cool of the day. Like, how sweet is that? Like,
Yeah.
that, like, we had that intimacy and that connection with the Lord, and that is how we are created.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that there's sin and a great chasm that was, brought between us because of that, Jesus came and He died and He rose again and He ascended into heaven to be able to gift us the Holy Spirit, so that He reestablished that garden,
Yeah.
that we get to walk with Him, that we get to steward His creation, that we get to co-labor with Him.
Yeah.
And so that might look like small things like chickens, but that also might look like really big things, such as people's lives in our ministries and, our work, in our community groups, in our churches,
Yeah.
on the baseball field, like, in the honestly, in the passenger seat, in the driver's seat as we're going down the highway, like,
Yeah.
God has given us this beautiful opportunity to co-create with Him, to
Mm-hmm.
steward the things that He has given us to do. And, sometimes those things look small, but how big those are, that God has given us that to do. So in all of that, it's just really been another beautiful eye-opening lesson of that He's calling us to co-create with Him, that He's calling us to steward, what He has given us, whether that be big or small, and just to really like sit in that humility that He is a good God, that He delights in giving His children good gifts. And, sometimes those beautiful blessings and those beautiful lessons come through really like hard seasons. Like, it's not all, rainbows and sunshine on the farm. There's losses, there's, injuries, there's heartbreak, there's things that are confusing, or there's times where, of course, yeah, like, we're not like selling enough eggs to meet the to pick up the tab on the feed this month, or all
Right.
those like little small things. But it is beautiful to see like the symbolism that He teaches us, and the fingerprints that He has all over our lives, should we take the time to just slow down and look. So
Yeah.
that's what I love about like the homesteading lifestyle. That's what I love about, what we're getting to kind of like start to learn and lean into with starting this journey, is that we have the opportunity. Like, rush and busyness is such an enemy of us. Like, we like to
Yeah.
be busy, we like to be rushed, we like to go and be entertained about all these different things, and we end up being distracted. But there's so many beautiful lessons and joys, should we take the time to slow down and look for them. So
Yeah.
that's what I love.
So good. So, so good. I love all the like just beautiful filling wisdom that you just shared through this entire recording. But since
Thank
we have
you.
like a minute left, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing, for just sharing your
Yeah.
heart for all this. And I'm so glad. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity just to share a little bit about what we do and what our heart is. And if you ever want to, we have our Facebook page, as you mentioned, called Griffin Grange. If you want to follow our story, we're moving from chickens to ducks to rabbits to all these fun things. And just, it's just a fun way that we try to capture what the Lord is doing in and through our story. So feel free to hop along and join us in that. So we're
Yes.
definitely super blessed to be in an amazing community and have great friends like you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Home and the Maker podcast. And for other podcasts from Shine.fm, visit the Shine.fm podcast channel.